The Galactic Education Crisis. The Impossible Problem. The conference room aboard Unity Station fell silent as Ambassador ZH of the Tethrian Coalition delivered the grim statistics. Her crystalline form flickered with anxious orange light as she addressed the assembled representatives from 43 different species. "Our children are falling behind," she announced, her translated voice heavy with concern. "Despite our advanced technologies, despite our centuries of educational refinement, we are producing adults who lack creativity, problem-solving skills, and emotional resilience." Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The Vrexian delegates shifted uncomfortably in their reinforced seats. The Andari representatives dimmed their usual glow. Even the normally composed Kaltorians allowed their facial tendrils to droop with worry. Commander Vorath, a decorated Vrexian military strategist, stood to address the assembly. His scales displayed the deep purple of serious concern. "This is not merely an educational issue. Our military academies report similar problems. Young recruits are brilliant with theory but crumble under unpredictable conditions. They cannot improvise. They cannot adapt. Our medical programs face the same challenge," added Dr. Sylvan, a Kaltorian physician whose reputation spanned 3-star systems. "Students memorize perfectly but cannot think creatively when faced with unusual cases. They follow protocols flawlessly until something unexpected happens. Then they freeze." The problem was universal. Every advanced civilization in the Galactic Council had noticed the same disturbing trend. Their education systems, perfected over thousands of years, produced knowledgeable but inflexible adults. Intelligent but uncreative. Skilled but unable to handle chaos. The human observer. In the back corner of the conference room, nearly forgotten, sat Ambassador Sarachan from Earth. Humanity had only recently joined the Galactic Council, and most species still considered them primitive newcomers. Sarah listened quietly, taking notes on her outdated tablet while the more established civilizations debated solutions. The proposed answers grew increasingly elaborate. The Tethrians suggested implementing advanced neural enhancement programs starting at birth. The Vrexians recommended more rigorous testing and competitive frameworks. The Andari proposed artificial intelligence tutors that could adapt to each student's learning patterns with perfect precision. Sarah raised her hand. Several delegates didn't notice. She stood up. "Yes?" Ambassador ZH acknowledged her with barely concealed impatience. "The human representative wishes to speak?" "Thank you," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the condescending stares. "I've been listening to your proposals, and I noticed something. You're all trying to make your education systems more controlled, more structured, more perfect." "Of course," Commander Vorath rumbled. "Precision and structure are the foundations of proper learning." "Maybe that's the problem," Sarah suggested gently. The room erupted. Delegates from a dozen species spoke at once, their translators creating a cacophony of objection. How dare this human, whose species had barely mastered interstellar travel, question civilizations that had been perfecting education for millennia? Sarah waited for the noise to subside. "On Earth, we have something we call daycare or preschool. Before formal education begins, we put our young children together in environments where they mostly just play." "Play?" Dr. Sylvan's tendrils curled with confusion. "You waste their early development years on purposeless activity?" "It's not purposeless," Sarah replied. "That's what we thought too, actually. About 100 years ago, we tried removing play from early childhood education. We wanted to start academic learning earlier, give our children an advantage. The results were catastrophic." She pulled up data on her tablet, projecting it for all to see. "Within a generation, we saw exactly what you're describing now. Adults who couldn't handle unpredictable situations. Increased anxiety and mental health problems. Decreased creativity and innovation. We course-corrected quickly, but we learned something important. Play isn't wasted time. It's how children learn to be adults." The skepticism. Commander Vorath's scales flashed dismissive yellow. You're suggesting that allowing children to engage in random, unstructured activity somehow prepares them better than systematic education? Yes, Sarah said simply. During play, children face problems with no predetermined solutions. They negotiate with peers who don't think like them. They take risks in safe environments. They fail repeatedly and learn that failure isn't catastrophic. They create imaginary scenarios and learn to think abstractly. They build things that fall apart and learn to try different approaches. Chaos, Ambassador ZH Kara said flatly. You're describing educational chaos. I'm describing controlled chaos, Sarah corrected. Adults supervise to ensure safety, but they don't direct the activity. The children drive their own learning through exploration and social interaction. Dr. Sylvan leaned forward, her interest piqued despite herself. You have data supporting this approach? Sarah nodded, pulling up more files. Extensive data. Children who attend quality play-based early education programs show significantly better outcomes in every metric you mentioned. Creative problem-solving, emotional regulation, adaptability, social skills, even long-term academic achievement. The benefits compound over time. Impossible, Commander Vorath declared. Unstructured time cannot produce structured thinking. Actually, it's the opposite, Sarah explained. Overly structured early experiences produce rigid thinking. The brain needs to experiment, to make connections freely, to learn through trial and error. When we control every aspect of a child's learning, we teach them that there's always one correct answer, one proper method, one right way to think. She gestured to the assembled delegates. You've all created perfect educational systems. Systems so refined, so optimized, so controlled that you've accidentally eliminated the messy, chaotic learning experiences that children need to develop flexible thinking. The room fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. Thoughtful rather than dismissive. The proposal. I have a proposal, Sarah continued, sensing an opening. Let me show you. Earth has agreed to host an experimental program. Send us some of your children, young ones just starting their educational journey. Let them participate in our daycare programs for one standard year. Then test them against peers who remained in your traditional systems. You want us to send our children to a primitive world to play? Ambassador ZH Kara's light flickered with disbelief. I want you to see what play-based learning produces, Sarah replied. If we're wrong, your children will have lost 1 year. Given that your current system isn't working, what do you have to lose? Commander Vorath stood, his full height impressive even among the diverse species present. The Vrexian people do not experiment with our children's futures based on the primitive theories of newcomer species. With respect, Commander, Sarah said quietly, you're not experimenting. You're doing the same thing that's already failing. I'm offering you a chance to try something different. Dr. Sylvan spoke up. The Keltorian medical community would be interested in observing this program. Not necessarily participating, but observing. Observation is welcome, Sarah agreed. In fact, I encourage it. Send your educators, your psychologists, your developmental specialists. Watch how the children interact. See what they learn. Draw your own conclusions. And if this fails? Ambassador ZH Kara asked. If your primitive methods damage these children? Then we'll adapt immediately, Sarah promised. But I don't think it will fail. We're not guessing here. We have centuries of research and practical experience. We know what healthy childhood development looks like. The decision. The debate continued for hours. Some delegates were intrigued. Many were skeptical. A few were openly hostile to the idea. But Sarah's data was compelling, and the current crisis was undeniable. Finally, a compromise emerged. 5 species would participate in a limited trial. Each would send a small group of children to Earth for 1 year. The children would be monitored constantly, their development assessed regularly. Teams of observers from all council species would have full access to document and analyze the program. As the meeting adjourned, Sarah felt both excitement and apprehension. She'd convinced them to try, but now she had to deliver results. The stakes were enormous. If this worked, it could transform childhood education across the galaxy. If it failed, humanity's credibility in the Galactic Council would be destroyed. Commander Vorath approached her as she gathered her materials. His scales showed a complex pattern she couldn't quite read. Ambassador Chen, he said formally, I opposed your proposal, but you argued well. I hope you understand what you've committed to. You're not just hosting children. You're challenging thousands of years of established educational philosophy. I understand, Sarah replied. But sometimes the newest perspective is the clearest one. We haven't had time to develop rigid assumptions about how things should work. Or perhaps, Vorath suggested, his scales shifting to thoughtful blue, you simply haven't had time to forget what actually matters. Sarah smiled. Maybe that's the same thing. The arrival. 6 months later, the transport ships arrived at Earth's orbital station. Sarah stood in the receiving area, flanking by teachers, child development specialists, and medical staff. She'd spent those months converting 3 facilities into what humans called developmental learning centers, but what she carefully labeled educational observation sites for the alien delegates. The first group off the ship were the Vrexian children, 5 youngsters accompanied by their parents and a stern-looking educational supervisor. The children were small for their species, their scales displaying the muted colors of nervousness and confusion. Commander Vorath himself had come, determined to oversee the program personally. His scales showed protective orange as he watched his people's children disembark. They will be safe, he asked Sarah for perhaps the 20th time. Completely safe, she assured him again. We've adapted our facilities for their biological needs. The staff are trained in Vrexian physiology and psychology. And you'll have complete monitoring access. The Kaltorian children arrived next, their facial tendrils wrapped tightly around their guardians. Then came the Tethrian youngsters, crystalline and fragile-looking, glowing with anxious colors. The Andari children floated behind their parents, their gaseous forms contained in specialized atmosphere suits. Finally, the Zorani children emerged, insectoid and clicking nervously. In total, 25 children from 5 species, all between the human equivalent ages of 3 and 5 years old. 25 young beings whose educational experience would be observed by representatives from every major civilization in the galaxy. No pressure at all. The first day. The disaster started immediately. Sarah should have expected it. The human teachers, following their training, arranged the playrooms with various stations. Building blocks, art supplies, musical instruments, dress-up clothes, toy vehicles, puzzles, and open spaces for running and climbing. They'd carefully adapted everything for different biology, but the concept remained the same. Spaces where children could choose their own activities and explore freely. The alien children entered the rooms and froze. They looked around in obvious confusion, then turned to the adults expectantly, waiting for instructions. You can play with anything you like, Teacher Emma said cheerfully, gesturing to the room. What interests you? The Vrexian children's scales flashed yellow. The Kaltorian youngsters' tendrils curled inward with uncertainty. The Tethrian children's glowed dim to barely visible. What should we do? A young Vrexian named Tkesh asked, his voice small and uncertain. Whatever you want, Emma replied with a warm smile. The children looked at each other in panic. Whatever they wanted? That wasn't an instruction. That wasn't a lesson plan. That wasn't anything they understood. One of the Tethrian children began to cry, her crystalline form flickering with distress. 2 Kaltorian youngsters huddled together, overwhelmed. The Zorani children made clicking sounds of confusion. In the observation room, filled with delegates and specialists from across the galaxy, Ambassador ZH Kara turned to Sarah with triumph in her flickering light. You see? Already your methods cause distress. These children are confused and upset because they lack proper structure and guidance. Sarah watched the scene carefully. Give them time, she said, though privately she felt worried. Remember, they've never experienced unstructured play. They don't know how yet. Children should not need to learn how to play, Dr. Sylvan observed. Play should be instinctive. It is instinctive, Sarah replied. But instincts can be suppressed by training. Your educational system started structured learning so early that these children never developed their natural play behaviors. The breakthrough. For 3 days, the situation barely improved. The children wandered the playrooms in confusion, constantly asking adults what they should do, what was correct, what would earn them approval. The teachers, following Sarah's instructions, kept redirecting them gently. What do you think you should do? What looks interesting to you? There's no right or wrong answer here. It was frustrating for everyone. The children were stressed. The parents were horrified. The observers were smug. Sarah began to doubt herself. Maybe these children were too conditioned. Maybe they'd started too late. Maybe her whole theory was wrong. Then, on the 4th day, something changed. A young Andari named Whispersong, contained in her atmosphere suit, drifted near the building blocks. She'd been watching human children play with them earlier, stacking them into towers and knocking them down with glee. The concept confused her. Why build something just to destroy it? But now, alone in the quiet morning before others arrived, she extended a tendril from her suit and carefully positioned one block. Then another. Then another. She built them into a small tower. And then, after a long hesitation, she knocked it over. The blocks scattered across the floor with a satisfying clatter. Whispersong made a sound that her translator rendered as startled delight. She stacked them again, higher this time. Knocked them over again. The crash was louder. The feeling was fun. Tkesh the Vrekshin found her there an hour later, stacking and crashing with increasing enthusiasm. He watched for several minutes, his scales shifting between confused yellow and interested green. What are you doing? He asked. I don't know, Whispersong replied, her gaseous form swirling with colors the translator couldn't quite capture. But I like it. Tkesh picked up a block hesitantly. Can I also do the not knowing thing? Yes, Whispersong said. I think that's the point. They built together, a tower taller than either of them. When it fell, they both made sounds of joy. 2 teachers watching from the corner smiled at each other but didn't interfere. By lunchtime, other children had joined them. They built towers, walls, bridges, and abstract structures that served no purpose except to be interesting. They knocked things down and built them differently. They argued about methods and compromised on solutions. They failed repeatedly and learned that failure was just another way to play. The transformation. Within 2 weeks, the playrooms were unrecognizable. The children had stopped asking for instructions and started creating their own activities. The changes came rapidly once they started. The Kaltorian children discovered art. Their tendrils, which in structured environments had been trained to perform precise manipulations, now splashed paint with abandon. They mixed colors that shouldn't work together and discovered new shades. They drew pictures that had no purpose except to express what they felt. Dr. Sylvan watched her people's children create abstract art with both horror and fascination. That's not proper technique, she murmured to Sarah. They're wasting materials. They're making messes. They're experimenting, Sarah corrected gently. They're learning that mistakes are okay. That there are multiple ways to do things. That creation can be messy and still valuable. The Vrekshin children discovered pretend play. At first, they didn't understand it at all. Why would you act like you were someone else? Why would you imagine scenarios that weren't real? But once they grasped the concept, they became obsessed with it. Tkesh declared himself a space pirate one morning and spent the entire day raiding the other play areas for treasure. Other Vrekshin children joined his crew. They built a spaceship from cardboard boxes and furniture. They created a map with hidden treasure markers. They developed elaborate rules for their imaginary universe. Commander Vorath watched his people's children with an expression Sarah had never seen on a Vrekshin face before. Something between bewilderment and wonder. They're pretending to be warriors, he said slowly. But not following any actual warrior protocols. They're making up their own rules, their own strategies, their own solutions to imaginary problems. Exactly, Sarah said. They're learning to think creatively about scenarios they've never encountered. They're developing flexible problem-solving skills in a safe environment where failure has no real consequences. The Tethrian children discovered music. Not formal music education, which they'd already started on their home world, but the pure joy of making sound. They banged on drums without rhythm. They blew into wind instruments without melody. They created noise that was objectively terrible but subjectively delightful. Then something remarkable happened. After weeks of chaotic sound-making, they started naturally organizing their noise into patterns. Not because anyone taught them to, but because patterns felt good. They created rhythms together, negotiating and compromising without adult intervention. They're discovering music theory on their own, Ambassador ZH Kara observed, her light flickering with amazement. We teach this formally at age 7 cycles. They're figuring it out at 4 cycles through play. Because play is learning, Sarah said. You just haven't been recognizing it as such. The social revelation. But the most dramatic changes were social. On their home worlds, the children had been educated in carefully controlled environments with structured interactions. They'd learned proper protocols for communication, correct behaviors for different situations, appropriate responses to various scenarios. In the playrooms, those protocols fell apart. And something better emerged. The children began to form genuine friendships across species. Tkesh and Whispersong became inseparable, despite having literally nothing in common biologically. A Keltorian named Silverstream bonded with a Zorani named Clicksong over their shared love of building elaborate structures. They fought sometimes. Without scripts for conflict resolution, they had to figure out how to resolve disagreements themselves. They negotiated, compromised, apologized, and occasionally remained angry for a while before reconciling. It was messy and emotional and utterly authentic. This is inappropriate behavior, one of the Vrexian observers objected when Tkesh got into an argument with another child over toy ownership. Children should not be allowed to have conflicts. Children should absolutely be allowed to have conflicts, Sarah replied. In supervised, safe environments where they can learn to resolve them. You can't teach conflict resolution by preventing all conflicts. You teach it by letting children experience disagreement and work through it. The argument between Tkesh and his playmate lasted several minutes. No adults intervened. The children's emotions ran high. Scales flashed angry red. Voices raised. It looked like a disaster. Then Tkesh said, "We could take turns?" The other child considered this. How many minutes each? 5 minutes? 10 minutes? 7 minutes? Okay. They shook hands, or the Vrexian equivalent, and returned to playing together. The entire observation room sat in stunned silence. Did they just? Commander Vorath started. Negotiate a compromise? Sarah finished. Yes. Without any adult input. That's what we call developing social-emotional intelligence. The evidence. As the months progressed, the data became undeniable. Regular assessments showed the experimental group developing skills at rates that shocked the observers. Their creative problem-solving scores were off the charts. When presented with novel challenges, they approached them with confidence and flexibility. They tried multiple solutions without fear of failure. They built on each other's ideas naturally. Their emotional regulation improved dramatically. Early in the program, they'd become distressed when things didn't work or when conflicts arose. Now they handled frustration with resilience, viewing obstacles as challenges rather than catastrophes. Their social skills surpassed not just their stay-at-home peers but also older children who'd been through years of formal social education. They negotiated, cooperated, empathized, and led with natural ease. Perhaps most remarkably, their academic readiness scores were equal to or better than their traditionally educated peers. Despite spending their time just playing, they developed pre-literacy, pre-math, and scientific thinking skills through their self-directed activities. Dr. Sylvan reviewed the data with several other medical specialists, her tendrils moving in patterns that indicated deep thought. The neurological scans are remarkable, she admitted. The children in this program show increased connectivity in brain regions associated with executive function, emotional processing, and creative thinking. Their neural development is measurably different from control groups. Different how? Ambassador ZH Kara asked. More flexible, Dr. Sylvan replied slowly, as if the words were difficult to say. More adaptable. Their brains are developing multiple pathways for processing information rather than single optimized routes. It's less efficient in some ways, but far more robust. Robust? Commander Vorath leaned forward. Resilient, Dr. Sylvan clarified. When optimal pathways are blocked, they have alternatives. When familiar solutions don't work, they can generate new ones. Their cognitive architecture is built for adaptation, not just optimization. The demonstration. 6 months into the program, Sarah organized a demonstration for the Galactic Council representatives. She brought in both groups of children, those from the experimental program and age-matched controls from traditional educational settings, and presented them with a series of challenges. The first challenge was simple: build a bridge using provided materials to cross a gap and support a small weight. The materials included blocks, tape, string, and various other items. No instructions were given. The traditionally educated children immediately looked to the adults for guidance. When none came, they hesitated. Finally, they attempted to replicate bridge designs they'd been taught in their formal lessons. Their bridges were technically correct but identical across all participants. The play program children approached it completely differently. They experimented immediately, trying different configurations without waiting for approval. They collaborated naturally, building on each other's ideas. They failed multiple times without distress, treating each failure as information rather than defeat. Their final bridges were wild and varied. Some were technically inferior to the traditional children's designs. But several were innovative solutions that even the adult engineers in the observation room hadn't considered. And every child from the play program successfully completed the challenge, while several traditionally educated children gave up when their first design didn't work. The second challenge was social: work in mixed species groups to create a performance for the observers. Any type of performance was acceptable. The traditionally educated children struggled immediately. They couldn't agree on what type of performance to do. They expected adult direction. When disagreements arose, they looked to authority figures to resolve conflicts. After 30 minutes, they'd made almost no progress. The play program children dove in enthusiastically. They negotiated roles, combined different species' strengths, adapted when plans didn't work, and incorporated everyone's ideas into a chaotic but creative performance that included music, storytelling, movement, and art. It wasn't polished or professional, but it was collaborative and joyful. The third challenge was the most revealing. Each child was given a novel problem their species had never encountered, something requiring true creative thinking rather than application of known solutions. The traditionally educated children struggled. Without familiar frameworks, they became frustrated and anxious. Many gave up quickly, saying they didn't know how to solve it because they hadn't been taught. The play program children approached unknown problems with confidence. They weren't afraid to try things, to fail, to experiment. They didn't need to know the right answer because they understood that sometimes you have to discover answers through exploration. By the end of the demonstration, even the most skeptical observers were quiet. The conversation. That evening, Commander Vorath requested a private meeting with Sarah. They sat in a small conference room overlooking Earth's surface, watching the sunset paint the sky in colors his species had no names for. "You've proven your point, Ambassador Chen," he said without preamble. "The data is clear. Your methods produce measurably superior outcomes in every metric we value." "I'm glad you're seeing the results," Sarah said carefully. But I'm angry, Borath continued, his scales flashing red. Do you understand why I'm angry? Sarah waited, letting him work through it. Because it means we've been wrong for thousands of years, he said, his voice rough with emotion. It means we've taken our most precious resource, our children, and systematically trained away their natural abilities. We've optimized the life out of them in pursuit of efficiency and structure. You didn't know, Sarah said gently. You did what you thought was best. We should have known, Borath argued. The signs were there. The increasing lack of innovation. The growing mental health crisis. The inability to handle unexpected challenges. We saw the problems but responded by adding more structure, more control, more optimization. We made it worse. He turned to face her fully. Do you know what the worst part is? We looked down on humanity. We thought you were primitive because you let your children play. We assumed our advanced systems were superior. And all along, you understood something fundamental that we'd forgotten. What's that? Sarah asked. That childhood isn't preparation for life, Borath said softly. It is life. And life needs room to be messy, to explore, to fail, to grow in unexpected directions. Sarah nodded. That's exactly right. We can't raise adaptable adults by controlling every aspect of childhood. We can only do it by giving children safe spaces to develop their own adaptability. The revolution. Word of the program's success spread rapidly through the Galactic Council. More species requested to send their children to Earth. Human educators were invited to other worlds to train teachers in play-based methodologies. Sarah became one of the most influential ambassadors in the Council, sought after for advice on reforming educational systems galaxy-wide. But the real revolution happened gradually, in playrooms and homes across hundreds of worlds. Parents who'd visited Earth and seen their children transform began advocating for change. Teachers frustrated with rigid curricula found permission to innovate. Communities started creating spaces where children could just be children. It wasn't instant. Thousands of years of educational philosophy couldn't be overturned overnight. Many civilizations struggled with the concept of giving up control. Some rejected the approach entirely, insisting their traditional methods were fine. But the data kept coming in. Every long-term study showed the same results. Children raised with significant play-based learning developed into more creative, adaptable, emotionally intelligent adults. They were better problem solvers, more resilient in crisis, more capable of innovation. And they were happier. The return. At the end of the year-long program, the participating families gathered for a final celebration. The playrooms were transformed for the occasion, decorated by the children themselves in a chaotic explosion of color and creativity that perfectly captured everything they'd learned. Tkesh gave a speech, speaking without notes or preparation. His scales showed confident blue as he addressed the assembly of parents, observers, and council representatives. When I came to Earth, I was scared, he said. Everything was different. There were no rules. No lessons. No one telling me what to do. I thought I was going to fail because I didn't know how to succeed. He paused, looking around at his fellow students. But then I learned something. You can't fail at playing. You can only learn. Every time something didn't work, I figured out something new. Every time I had a problem, I tried different solutions. Every time I made a friend, I learned something about their world and mine. He turned to his parents. I don't want to go back to the old way. I don't want every day planned out. I don't want every answer told to me. I want to keep exploring. I want to keep creating. I want to keep being a kid who plays. His mother's scales showed emotional purple. You think the old educational system was better for you? No, Tkesh said firmly. The old way taught me to follow instructions. The new way taught me to think. Which one do you want me to know when I grow up and face problems no one has solved before? The room erupted in discussion. Parents talked to their children. Educators argued with each other. Policymakers debated with scientists. But the conversation had fundamentally shifted. The legacy. 5 years after the initial program, Sarah stood in the same conference room where she'd first proposed the experiment. But this time, she wasn't defending a controversial idea. She was accepting an award from the Galactic Council for transforming childhood education across the known universe. Ambassador Chen, the council speaker, said formally, "Your work has revolutionized how we think about child development. You've given our children back their childhoods, and in doing so, you've given our civilizations back their futures." Sarah looked out at the assembly. She saw Commander Vorath, now heading a galaxy-wide initiative to train play-based educators. Dr. Sylvan, researching the neurological benefits of unstructured childhood experiences. Ambassador ZH Kara, overseeing the transformation of Tethrian schools. And scattered throughout the audience, she saw the young adults who'd been part of that first experimental group. Tkesh was studying to be an engineer, already holding patents for innovative designs. Whispersong was composing music that blended styles from dozens of worlds. Silverstream was researching creative approaches to medical challenges. They weren't just successful by traditional metrics. They were vibrant, curious, resilient people who approached life with joy and confidence. "I didn't give you anything you didn't already have," Sarah said in her acceptance speech. "Every species in this room once understood the importance of play. You just forgot somewhere along the way, in your pursuit of efficiency and optimization." She smiled at the audience. "Humans didn't invent play. We just remembered not to lose it. And that's perhaps the most important thing we've contributed to the galactic community. The reminder that sometimes the most advanced approach is to step back and let children be children. Because childhood isn't a problem to be solved through education," she concluded. "It's a gift to be protected. And when we protect that gift, we give our children something more valuable than any lesson plan or curriculum. We give them the chance to become fully, wonderfully, messily themselves." The applause that followed was long and genuine. But Sarah's attention was caught by something else. In the far corner of the room, a group of young beings from a dozen different species were clustered together, not paying attention to the ceremony. They were building something with blocks, arguing cheerfully about the best design, knocking it down and starting over, completely absorbed in their play. Sarah watched them and smiled. That, right there, was the point of everything. Not the awards or recognition. Just children being given the space to be children, learning through the most ancient and effective educational method ever discovered. They were playing. And in doing so, they were becoming exactly who they needed to be.